Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk more about taking better pictures with your phone. Now, it doesn't matter if you have a fancy camera or if you have your smartphone. Either way, how can we take better pictures? And since we mostly use our smartphones, this is kind of geared towards that kind of mindset. But let's talk about some basics. Now, in a previous video, when we got right into the very basics, we talked about the concept of the rule of thirds, if you remember that. The idea that if you divide your screen vertically into thirds and then horizontally into thirds, and then placing subjects on those third lines, how you can communicate better and also kind of show some depth and life and dynamism to your pictures. Let's take that and go even further and talk more about framing. Because when it comes to the idea of what's in the frame, how I set that frame in motion, that changes the whole feel of your pictures. Now, I'm not talking just basic things like a close-up versus an extreme close-up versus a what they call a mid-shot, but I'm talking about not just that, but also the idea of my angles, things like leading lines and things like that come into play. So let's talk about those kind of things. Then we'll dig into some phenomenology of photography, which gets a little bit more heady, and we'll save that for last. So when we look at the idea of framing our shots and getting all that ready and looking good, let's talk about something like angles. Now, when it comes to understanding angles, there's some basic things to think about. And typically when we tilt up or tilt down, we can actually change how a photo looks. And a lot of times we don't think too deeply about that, until we see a picture and we know that something's different. We know that something's off and we can't quite figure out why. So for example, if you are taking a picture and you're framing down on somebody, you're making them look smaller. You're making them look maybe more submissive. You're making them look more diminished in stature and importance. Maybe you don't think too much about that, but that's how it looks and how it carries on. And it's the reverse for when you're looking up. So if you just tilt a little bit and aim up, you can end up making somebody look more strong and more powerful and more commanding in presence. So whenever you're thinking, what do I want to do with my photo? Do I just want to just document that someone's here? Well, then no big deal. I just frame them up and take the picture. But do I want to do something artistic to make them look like there's more life to them than just what the camera just grabs? I want the photo to speak some. Well, do I want to make this person look small? Not that I want to make them look like insignificant, but say, for example, you want to make them look small compared to something else in the shot. Or maybe you're artistically trying to show the person is feeling lonely or isolated or maybe small in that moment. Again, just tilting down and taking a picture of them at a downward angle will clearly show that kind of a work. And then maybe I want to make them look more powerful, like they have great stature. Then just tilting up a little bit can change that look. And it's amazing how much you just tinker with these two things will come to play. Now, a quick word of warning, along with the idea of how I tilt my camera, it's also going to change basically people's appearance as well. So if somebody, maybe you put on a few extra pounds over Christmas and Thanksgiving and the winter weight has added on, shooting an upward angle, it, makes us aware of that weight. Whereas shooting a little bit downward angle tends to make that weight tend to disappear. So if you're a little bit conscious about your weight, have more downward angles, because again, it makes someone smaller and it just does that to the mind. Whereas if you go up, you tend to see them a little bit more on their size. So that's one of the things to be thinking about with that. And then another thing too is if you're changing your angles too, you have to realize how close the camera is to the person. So if the camera's fairly close to the person's head and you're aiming down, it's going to make their head look really big and their body's going to get tinier as it goes. So if you want to make them look like they've got a real big head, that's a good way. If it's not what you want, then you probably don't want to be so close to them when you take that kind of downward shot. Same thing with up. If you're too close to the subject, it's going to make their legs look like they're really, really long, and then their body just keeps getting smaller as it goes up. Again, that's one of those things that most people don't want that kind of look. Again, it's really artistic if you want that look, great. But if you just want to show them having a little bit more commanding posture, that's not the best way. Back up a little bit and tilt up. So that's some quick ideas with just dealing with angles and how that can change the way people think of things. The next thing I want to talk about is the concept of what's known as leading lines. Now, leading lines are using lines that exist somewhere in nature or in industry or whatever, and have those lead to certain things. So, for example, when most people look at a tree, they just see a tree. But when you're looking at it from a photographic mind, you're seeing things like that straight up nature of the trunk. I mean, that is a leading line. It is pointing straight up and down, unless, of course, it's on a bank and tilting. But it's pointing somewhere. It's a solid mast, And then if the leaves are down, like say you're in the winter, I mean, you got branches galore. You got all kinds of lines pointing in different directions. Again, most people just see a jumbled mess of branches. But if you're looking at it with a photographic mind, you see all kinds of lines. So what's really obvious is when you have like a main trunk with a main beam of a branch sticking out, and now all of a sudden, like I've got an arrow pointing at something. Pointing at what? So if I can have that kind of thing pointing in that direction, that'd be great. Also we've got power lines everywhere. You look and there's pretty much power lines all over the place. Those are lines that go horizontally, and they show up all over the place. Well, how could I use those? And you will start looking around, you see buildings. Buildings are full of angles and lines, staircases, handrails. You see those kind of things all the time. A set of steps. I mean, if you're staying at the bottom of the steps kind of fade off and look narrower at the top. Or if you're at the top, you look down and they get narrower as they go down. You've got all these great leading lines that take people somewhere. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be looking straight down the line. You could have, like a stairwell that comes down and somebody, the stairwell is basically pointing to them at the bottom. So you have the picture, instead of having it framed directly on the person, have the person down below and the stairwell and the railing or whatever kind of points down to them, or vice versa. You put them on the top and have the stair, railing pointing up to them. Another thing that people use a lot of times are rail tracks and roads. Those are also perfect because they just kind of, point towards things all the time. So why not use those? Even curbs. I mean, there are all kinds of things out there that are naturally occurring or man-made industrial type lines that point to things. The human eye wants to follow lines. That's just, we don't typically wander if there's a hard line somewhere that's just drawing us in. So using those is really useful, and pay attention to where they go and where I could use them to point. Now, the one dangerous thing with lines and things like that is we're not thinking of them. Again, if we don't have the photographic mind, we just don't think about them and put someone in a picture, and then we create a problem because there are lines there. For example, a lot of times there'll be a tree and, the tree looks pretty. Let's put the person right in front of the tree and take the picture. Well, now I've got this leading line of a tree coming out of the top of my head. And that becomes a little bit weird. Like a lot of times people don't think about that. It's like, it's a tree. It'll look nice. Well, we can't see the tree. The person's literally standing in front of it. And now they have the top of the tree coming out of the back of their head. Because you don't see that when you're taking the picture, because you can see in 3D. Pictures are 2D. So have them stand off to the side of the tree and then slightly in front of it. Or if they want to be a little bit more playful, slightly behind it. Like the hide and go seek kind of a thing going on there. Again, those are ways that you can use lines that exist. You just have to be aware that they are there. Otherwise, you got this tree just poking up out of your head, or some rail that comes out of your back or something like that. It looks a little bit weird. So be mindful of all the lines that exist in nature. And then another thing that I want to talk about that's a little bit more complicated, and it'll take a little bit more time to discuss, is basically the idea of phenomenology in photography. Now, phenomenology is the study of phenomena, the study of experience. Well, that in of itself is a great area to study when we talk about humans and how they study and how they experience things. Great. But what about how your camera experiences things? That sounds a little bit weird. Richard, what are you talking about? Well, we have to realize that we see things and we grasp them the way that we think we see them. Cameras see things differently than we do. That's why there are all the settings on them to get them to see as best as we can possibly see. But again, the camera is an eye and it's looking. What does the camera see? Or if you want to get more esoteric, what does the camera want to see? why should we not like enjoy what the camera sees? And I tell you, when you start thinking of these kind of more esoteric thoughts, it starts to really change your photography. Now, what gets even deeper into the weeds is when you start thinking about the subject. Now, when you think of a human, I know like how I want to stand, how I want, what's flattering or what's ugly, for me, as far as like which way I can stand and orient myself. So when you take a picture of me, it looks okay. So I know how I want to be photographed. But what if the subject's not human? How do you think that mountain wants to be photographed, or that tree, or that bush, or that bird, or that dog, or that car? Now, wait a minute. That sounds really weird, Richard. It can be, but again, it's one of those things that when you start thinking of, you have a side that, your good side. And I don't know which side's my good side. They're both kind of ugly. But it's one of those things that you have your side. And everyone like prefers a certain way. And maybe they have their own special pose that they do. Whatever they do, they have their pose. And people know that and have that look. Why doesn't a mountain have that? Why doesn't a car have that? Why doesn't your dog have that? Why not? I mean, like you start thinking it sounds a little bit absurd until you start thinking about it. Wait, if I do, why shouldn't they? And when you start getting to their level, to where they are, you'll start realizing real quick that yes, in fact, they do. So you think of when you take a picture of a dog, well, what are you doing? You're standing up there at however many feet tall you are, looking down and taking a picture of your dog. Where's your dog? Your dog's down here. So you've got to get down to where your dog is. So maybe you get down on a knee. It's like, that feels a little bit weird, but where's the dog? The dog is down there. And maybe the dog's from up here, you're capturing its head really well, the top of its head, the top of its back. You get down low and all of a sudden you realize your dog has facial features too. Your dog has curves and body lines too. So why not get down low and take a picture of your dog? Why not? Maybe you want to get into the idea of, moving and getting a different picture of your car. Like, if you want to just take a picture of a car, there it is. But if I want like a good picture of my car, if I want to like show off my car, where does your car live? I mean, if you've seen the Disney movie Cars, where are the eyeballs? They put it on the windshield, but typically you think of like headlights as the eyes, the grill as the mouth. Well, that's the face of the car. Get down way low to where the face of your car is to take a picture of it. It's like, but that seems so different and weird. Yeah, but if you look online and think of your favorite car and just hop on Google and type in that name of that car and then hit your image tab and start looking at all the different pictures, you're going to realize that very few of them are just taken from just me standing up and taking a picture of a car. They're going to be much more exotic, much more glamorous. And that's the idea of the photographer getting down low, maybe catching it at an angle, and looking at the different ways that the car looks. I mean, just like a human, a car has a side that's a good side and a bad side. And it could be because of dings and dents, but it could also just be the angle's not quite right. And the way the light hits it, it looks different in a certain light. Have you ever noticed how many curves are in a car? I mean, cars have curves and straight lines, and they've got haunches, like hips, so they've got all of these lines that make them look racy or sexy or adventurous. Car companies spend billions of dollars designing these things. And, it's when you start grabbing a camera and then you get down on one knee and you start recognizing like, whoa, my car has lines. And all of a sudden you start realizing like, my car's kind of sexy. Or my car looks really rough and tough, or my car looks very like angry, or whatever whatever your car happens to look like. And it's one of those things that you don't realize until you get down to where the car is. Just like with you. I mean, imagine if you were a car or a dog and somebody was always taking a picture of you from way up there. I mean, it would be the same picture all the time. And you're like, hello, come down here. I've got a real face. Come on down. And and it's just one of those things that we don't think about until we try it. You want to see improved pictures, start thinking of what's the best image and angle and everything of the subject. So what does the subject want to experience? So that's what I'm talking about, the phenomenology of the picture, not what I want the picture to turn out to look like, but what is the object, how does it want to be pictured? How does it want to, if you're going to take my photo, do it this way. Ask yourself when you're taking a picture of something. Again, I know this sounds really esoteric, but you want to see your pictures change, that's a great way to do it. So you get down there and meet up where things are. Now, one thing that comes into play, and when we look at videography or photography, they have what's known as the bird's eye view or the worm's eye view, and that's where you're getting way up and shooting way down, like the way a bird would see. Because normally, again, if I'm taking a picture of a dog, I'm 6 foot tall, I'm just taking a picture of the dog down there, it's a few feet difference. But what if I'm like way up and taking like almost a straight down view? That's a bird's eye view. Or if I'm going to change the way something looks, I can put the camera down on the ground and then slightly tilt it up, and then I've got this worm's eye view. Now that's a great way to take picture of things that you probably have never ever thought about before. You want a neat picture of your dog or your car or your house or whatever, lay on the ground and take the picture. Now obviously do this when it's dry, and do this if you don't mind people looking at you a little bit weird, because it's a little bit strange for somebody to be laying on the ground. But again, if you want some really good photography, lay on the ground. Get the camera on the ground. Just set it right on the pavement or on the grass or on a book or something, and just slightly tilt it up. And it's a totally different picture. And the more you start doing these things, you're going to start seeing things radically differently. Take, for example, flowers. Wow, that's a pretty flower. Look at that bush. It's got lovely flowers on it. Well, most of the time we just take the picture. We might get adventurous enough and do a close-up and take a picture and try to get the detail of the pictures or the flowers. But how often have you got down to where the flower is? Like, if this is the flower, why am I shooting the picture from here? Get down to where the flower is and look at it in its face. Take that picture. And how many times have you ever seen a picture of a flower from down here? You almost never do, because, well, when are you ever below a flower? So if you could get down low and take a picture up and catch a flower that way, it's an entirely different picture, something you just haven't seen before, something you haven't experienced before, the phenomenology kicking in there. So again, it's one of those things of, how can I capture this thing in a way it's never been seen? If you can change that, your photography is going to radically change. Don't worry about the bells and the whistles, the buttons and all the settings and all that fun stuff that's buried deep in your phone. Just try it just when your phone's just doing its auto mode. Again, this is just some basic stuff. But it's amazing, like most people a lot of times focus on how can I change all my different settings to make the picture better. It's like, if you work with the angles, if you work with the framing, that will do more for your pictures than playing with all the settings. I mean, the settings are fun, and I'm not discounting that. I'm not saying that's not a good way to do things. I'm just saying that if you want to make rapid changes, start playing with the way your camera is setting up, the way you approach the subject, the way that you would think that the subject would want to be approached. Again, you can take a picture of a trash can and make it look downright glamorous if you get the angles right. And you think, well, that's got to be crazy. But no, it's not. I mean, literally, again, go on Google, type in anything. Type in a trash can picture, hit image, and look for the different pictures. You can probably find some people who have taken some really dramatic, and artistic pictures of trash cans. But again, anything, horses, it doesn't, pick anything you want to do. And you're going to find out that there are some great ways to change that. So tinker with this on your own. And if you need some further help with that, like I said, go to Google or whatever and type in something and hit your image button and look and see and go, that's an interesting picture. How'd they take that? And start thinking, where's the camera in relation to the thing? And once you start moving through that, you're going to start realizing, wait, that's actually below it. So I need to move my camera down below the thing, or that's off to the side. And so with the rule of thirds, you're paying attention to where it is on one of those third lines. But what I'm talking about today is focusing on where it is in relation to the camera. Where's the camera in relation to the thing? So there's this conversation that's happening between the object and your camera. Again, we're thinking of it ourselves. I just want to take the picture of the thing. But there's a conversation that's happening here between that thing and the camera, specifically the camera lens. It's the eyeball of the camera. So they're having this conversation. They're trying to have eye contact with each other. So where's the eye contact going to be with that subject and the object? So think of those kind of things next time you grab your camera and you're like, I'm going to take a picture of some stuff. Springtime comes, all the neat little buds start popping out. They look great. The birds start coming back if you're living in a northern climate. Take that phone out. Start taking some pictures. Start moving. Don't just stand there robotically and hold it up to your face. Start moving where that camera is and see what you can come up with. You might just surprise yourself. That's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.